This is about developing personal resilience through the direct teaching of resilience skills, which in some ways is what I've done for the past 26 years. I've always taught resilience skills to students, and I think through that teaching, I have become more resilient myself. I don't know if you know me at all, but why isn't my clicker? Ah, there it is. So I am right now in New Zealand, up here at the top of the world, and I've spent, as Stacey said, I've spent the last 26 years traveling around the world running my workshops. Obviously, it's been somewhat restricted for the last 2 years. And like all of you, I'm sure, I've had to turn part of my home into a kind of a recording studio to get involved in distance learning. And it's been stressful, it's been difficult. It's funny because I never ever have any difficulty delivering presentations. It's what I've done forever. But when it's online, it seems to double the stress and double the pressure. And I'm sure you've felt all that. And of course, it's been doubly bad for students. They've been put into a situation that they did not expect, that they probably weren't very prepared for, and they've had to do the best they can. So this is what I want to talk about, the effect on them. And I want to start by going back a long way, back to the early 1970s and some experiments with, fairly nasty experiments with rats. And just imagine for a moment, 3 rats in 3 separate cages. And rat in cage number 1 has a normal life. It has food to eat, it has water to drink, and there's a bar at the end of the cage which it presses, but pressing it does nothing at all. Rat number 2 is in exactly the same cage, except the floor of the cage is electrified, and it gets random electric shocks for random duration, but it learns very, very quickly that pushing the bar at the end of the cage stops the shocks completely. And rat number 3, everything's exactly the same. It gets electric shocks at random intervals for random amounts of time, but pressing the bar does nothing at all. So after some conditioning in these awful environments, the rats are taken out and put into different cages, and these cages are twice as wide. And they've got a little low wall in the middle of them. It's this kind of a height that a rat could easily jump over. And on one side of the wall is the electrical grid, and on the other side of the wall is no electrical grid. So the rat is put onto the electrical grid. Rat number 1 is put onto the electrical grid and given a shock. And it jumps straight over the wall to the other side because it's never had a shock before. It's a totally new experience. Rat out of cage number 2 is put onto the electrical grid and it's given a shock, and it jumps straight over the wall to the other side because it had some control over the shocks that it received. And so it escapes immediately. Rat number 3 is put onto the electrical grid and given a shock, and it just stays there. And it's given another shock and it just stays there. And it doesn't jump over the wall, even though it can, because it's learned to be helpless. And this is the whole the idea that Martin Seligman developed in the early 70s about learned helplessness, that some people in situations, there's got to be 3 conditions. One is that they're suffering some form of distress. The second is that they feel they have no control over the distress. And the third is that they feel they cannot escape. And some people in that situation, not just rats, but people as well, become helpless. And Seligman discovered that he could actually produce these conditions just by giving people impossible puzzles to solve and putting time pressure on them and making them try and solve these impossible puzzles. But if you think about it, in the COVID situation that we're just out of and we're trying to forget about and we're trying to put behind us, most of us, I think, in the world, those have been some of the conditions that have prevailed for children, especially. They have been in a situation that they found stressful and distressing. Not only the workload and not only having to work online, but also the whole COVID situation has been very distressing for a lot of people. They've felt like it's totally out of their control. They can't control the COVID situation. They also can't control the amount of information that's coming to them and the work they have to do. And they feel they can't escape because for a lot of the time, no doubt, they were locked down at home under time pressures as well. And so this produces in some children helplessness. But if you think also about what are the kind of memes that have been pouring through social media in the last 2 years. Well, it seems to me there's been some prevalent stories abundant through the social media. And one is that the world is driven and run by major megalithic rapacious corporations with budgets often larger than the budgets of small countries, that the wealth in the world is all the wealth in the world is concentrated in the hands of very few. This is a slide showing that Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, and Jeff Bezos, if you put their fortunes together, it is greater than the total amount of money that the bottom 50% of people in America have. So it's just with regards to America, but the situation is not that different in other places. And then the third meme is that sometime in the very near future, the Chinese economy will take over as the largest economy in the world. And for a lot of people, they are afraid of that. They fear that the rise of China as the #1 economic power in the world will actually destabilize global security and cause all sorts of problems that cannot be anticipated. Then, of course, there's also terrible things like plastic pollution, which is destroying our seas and destroying our wildlife. This is a terrible picture, isn't it? This is a bird that's starved to death because its stomach is full of undigestible plastic. And of course, anthropogenic CO2 emissions are causing an increase in temperature across the world and other forms of climate change, which is resulting in the habitats of some of the most precious animals in the world being reduced almost to nothing, and all our major species facing the possibility of extinction. And then you add to this plague virus that seems to be out to gobble us all up and cause us all terrible, terrible health problems. And what you've got when you think about is a perfect storm of factors. Influences pushing us towards vulnerability and depression. And it seems to be hopelessness plus helplessness. In other words, the feeling that there is no hope and there's nothing I can do about it. And this, of course, is the opposite of resilience. And this causes a reaction in young people, of course. And it's no wonder that some of them are so angry.
People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
Oh, an angry young lady with a great message. But of course, not everyone gets angry in that situation. Many others feel vulnerable, they feel anxious, and they feel depressed. So what can we as teachers do about it? Well, I started by trying to map out these things. And if you map out hopelessness along a scale, the scale will probably go from no hope to full of hope, won't it? And if you map out helplessness, the scale will probably go from there's nothing I can do to I have complete control. And I mapped that out, but then I looked at it and I thought, actually, that's not a scale of hopelessness, it's a scale of hope. And that's not a scale of helplessness, it's a scale of control. So maybe if we married those two scales together, we could actually come up with a system that helps students or anyone to develop more resilience. And it's a combination. It's not just about hope. It's not just about being positive. Being positive is all very well, but it doesn't solve all the problems. You've also got to take control where you can. And if you put those two things together, you seem to overcome the problems of optimism. There are some problems, and you also seem to utilize the strengths of control. So I want to show you how this comes. So if you put those two things together, you've got the resilient quadrant, and in the opposite quadrant, of course, you've got vulnerability. So I want to show you how these happen. And I think we can utilize this and teach resilience to our students in 5 simple steps. First, we've got to engage their attention. We've got to get their attention on this topic of resilience and give it to them in a way that they understand exactly what resilience means, because resilience is not the same as self-motivation. It's not the same as persistence and perseverance. It is a different set of behaviors. It is a different way of thinking. So we've got to engage their attention and reach a common understanding about what we mean by resilience. Then we've got to try and activate their experience, utilize their own life story, utilize their own experience to help them understand how to generate resilience. We can create powerful metaphors of resilience, and we can help them develop, what I call their know state, which is that corner of the grid. that actually grid creates 4 no states, and it's GNO state from the Greek gnosis, which means self-knowing. So these are states of self-knowing. So let me show you how this works. So first we need to get their attention. So I always use video clips to get students' attention, and I've got one here on resilience, because I think the key thing to get across to students is that resilience can be characterized by the ability to overcome adversity. It's just a cheese ad after all, but it certainly captures young children's attention, and they love that kind of thing. You know, no animals were injured in the making of that video clip. It's all CGI. So start by getting their attention, and then activate their, and also not just their attention, but also it demonstrates the key point about resilience, that resilience is about overcoming adversity. Then second, activate their experience. Now, what I suggest you do is you ask them to try and remember from their life a time when they did demonstrate some resilience, and ask them to think how they managed to do that. So I describe it like this: remember a time when you were working on a task, doing a job, playing sport, or trying to learn something new, and you suffered a serious setback or failure, disappointment, or problem. But it needs to be one example when you did manage to get back up again and finish off the task, the job, the game, or the learning. So you might have to spend a little time getting them to think back at a time like this. Like I use the example I've got for myself is learning to sing. When I was at school, I was always enthusiastic about singing, and I used to sing in church, and I used to think I could sing reasonably well. But I remember one day when the choir master went along the row of boys and he said, "You," he was pointing at me, he said, "Can you just mouth the words from now on?" Whoa, that was a terrible thing to do to young boys. So after that, I thought I couldn't sing. And that feeling lasted with me for many, 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 many years. And then I got an opportunity to go to a workshop in New Zealand here, learning a cappella singing, you know, singing without musical accompaniment. And I did a one-day workshop, and it was wonderful. It was great, and I really sang well. And then the follow-up was a 2-day weekend workshop. So I went to that, but unfortunately, what had happened was my confidence had gone right up, but my ability, my skills were still quite low. My ability might have been there, but certainly my skills were low. So I went to this 2-day workshop, and I threw myself in front of everyone, and I sang my heart out, and I really wasn't very good. And by the end of the weekend, no one wanted to sing with me. So I left that workshop once again, defeated and depressed, and feeling like I could never learn to sing. And that lasted, if that was probably 10 years ago, that probably lasted about 10 years. And then last year, here where I live, a little town in Raglan, there was a choir being set up, and I summoned up my courage, and I went to the choir and didn't push myself forward, hung back and learned. And we had an amazing choir teacher, and she taught me how to listen. She taught me that learning to listen is the most important thing about learning to sing. And I actually contributed reasonably well, and I built up my skills, and I became better at singing. So now I'm reasonably confident to join another choir and carry on that process. So it's that kind of thing where we're really enthusiastic about something, but you keep getting knocked back and knocked back. And the question is, how did you get yourself back on task after the setback? Well, for me, it was kind of like I always believed that I could sing, but I thought, like, I mean, my whole life has been about teaching people the skills of thinking and learning, the skills that underpin every kind of academic or intellectual activity we want to undertake. So I always felt that there was just some skills missing. And so I focused on the skills and tried to learn, and took those setbacks as being just minor things, and got myself motivated again and got back into the game. So that's how I do it. How do you do it? Because every person has their own strategy. And I'd really like you to think about it for yourself. And the best way to do that is to teach this to your students and think about it, you know, do it with them. And how you get yourself back on task after the setback, I always get students to write that down, you know, put it in words, and maybe add to it over time. And that is your resilience strategy. And it's unique, it's different. For every single person has got a different resilience strategy. So I get students to share it and practice it every day, because every day there's some disappointment, isn't there? Every day there's some little thing that you have to overcome. Then the more you practice it, the better at it you get. So that's the first exercise that I suggest that you might like to do with your students. And then secondly, I think it's really useful, and this is a little clip on very young students, but it's really useful to create powerful metaphors of resilience that children can understand. So here's a little clip showing a really, really good way to do that.
Who does it look like?
It looks like me.
That's right. I want you to do everything that you can to knock your toy down. Who is the strongest in class? Jerron, come on up, please. I'm going to give Jerron a prop, and he's going to try to knock it off the table. Ready, Jerron? Okay, children, who can tell me what it means to have resilience? Yes, Paige?
Resilience means if you make the toy fall down, it'll come back up very, very fast.
Very nice.
So reinforcing that whole idea of bouncing back. I think it's a great metaphor to reinforce. So here is the full grid of no states, as I call them. So we have the resilient, and opposite the resilient is the vulnerable. We also have two other categories of no state. One is the hopeful, and this is the, in my experience, the typical kind of 14-year-old boy who says to his mother, yeah, I'm going to ace this test. I'm going to do really well at this test, this exam. Oh no, I'm not going to do any study. No, I'll just wing it. I'll just do it. I've got natural talent. In other words, they're always thinking positively, but they don't actually take any action to achieve their goals. And down in the bottom right-hand corner, we have what we call the stoic, who are people who take control. In fact, the stoics sometimes take too much control. They try and control others as well, but they feel like it's all going to come out badly. You know, they're this kind of solid worker that plods on and works hard and achieves things, but they're particularly negative and they really don't expect it to turn out well. So those are my four no states, and I'll show you where you can go and do an analysis for yourself or your students, or if you want. But I want to focus on each of these axes in turn, because first we've got the hope axis, which is from extremes, obviously. It is a continuum. And at one extreme, you've got people who are always thinking positively, and you've got another extreme, which is people who are always thinking negatively. And very few people are at the extremes. Everyone's somewhere in between. And the key theorist is Martin Seligman, and he has learned helplessness in 75, learned optimism in 1990, positive psychology 1998, and Flourish 2011. And here he is himself. And I've just got a very short little piece of what he's saying here. Just listen to this.
It turns out if you take pessimistic people, depressive people, of which I'm an example, and you teach them principles of recognizing the catastrophic thoughts they're saying to themselves, this interview is going terribly, I've really lost my touch, and then arguing against it. No, you know, Joe's been laughing and smiling at my jokes throughout. Then it turns out you can make people permanently, lastingly more optimistic.
So what he's talking about in that brief snip there is about what he called a person's explanatory style, their way of talking to themselves. And I think that one of the greatest things Martin Seligman ever recognized or understood or developed was the idea that there is no such thing as a pessimist or an optimist. There is only optimistic thinking and pessimistic thinking. And everyone's on some kind of continuum between those two. And it's interesting when you look at the data as to how a type of thinking affects us metabolically, because optimistic thinking with lots and lots of medical studies has been linked with better physical health, 50% more antibodies in response to vaccine, that could be useful right now, reduce risk and less severe disease, less depression and mental health, longer life, more happiness and more resilience after failure. So it's generally a good thing to do. But of course, since Seligman's time, people have come up with theories like the toxic optimism theory and the cruel optimism theory. And what they are saying is that you can't just live in a bubble of optimism, because there are 3 areas where optimism doesn't actually work. And this is where pessimistic thinking is more useful, because pessimistic thinking is linked with a more accurate judgment of your own abilities. It's like, imagine you're in a small aeroplane and you've got a pilot and it's really foggy and the lights are out and he's trying to find the airport. Do you want an optimist or a pessimist? Do you want someone with optimistic thinking or someone with pessimistic thinking at the controls? You probably want someone who's a little bit more pessimistic in their thinking, don't you? And when you've got money to invest, an investment advisor, do you want an investment advisor that's always engaged with optimistic thinking, or do you want someone who's occasionally engaged with pessimistic thinking? I would think that a little bit of caution is probably useful in those situations. So pessimistic thinking is associated with a less inclination to take risks and less likelihood to blame others for your own mistakes. And these are the areas that have been picked out where optimistic thinking falls down. But you see, we can pick up that slack there by thinking about control, because it is not useful to be constantly pessimistic in your thinking either, because pessimistic thinking is also linked with poorer health, more depression, and more helplessness. So I'm suggesting blending optimistic thinking with control. But let's just look at the optimistic thinking for a start. Where do you sit on a continuum between optimistic thinking and pessimistic thinking? And does it change by situation? Just answer these quick questions here. Imagine you park in a car park building and you go shopping in the center of the city where you're living. And when you return, you see that there is now a big crease all the way down one side of your car where someone has crashed into you. What do you say to yourself in that moment? What do you say to yourself? If you're sitting with someone else, tell them. What do you say to yourself in that moment? And then think, which of these 3 is it more like? Is it like this? Is it some idiot has run into my car? Where is the car park attendant? He should have prevented this. Or is it more like, oh, well, bad stuff happens? Or is it more like, this is all my fault. I knew I shouldn't have parked there? Because A is more optimistic thinking, B is more neutral, and C is more pessimistic thinking. Where do you think you fit? Second question, as you get closer to the car, you notice you've also got a flat tire and you know you don't have a spare. What do you say to yourself now? Optimistic thinking would be something like, okay, that's enough bad luck. Something good has to happen now. Neutral thinking would be something like, sometimes I have a bad day. Pessimistic thinking would be something like, why does this always happen to me? Every time I go out in the car, something bad happens. Catastrophizing, making it worse and worse and worse. Which is your kind of thinking? 2 more. You manage finally to wrench the driver's door open, and as you do, something falls down behind the dashboard onto the floor. You pick it up and discover it is a piece of jewelry of great personal value that you thought was lost, but now, because of the crash, has now been found. What do you say to yourself now? Well, is it something like this? Even my bad luck is good. That's a very optimistic way of thinking. Sometimes good things happen. That's kind of neutral. Or maybe I should find the culprit and thank him for crashing into me. That's a more pessimistic view of the situation. Last one. You settle into the car and notice a piece of paper on the passenger seat. You read it and see it is from whoever crashed into your car, offering to pay to fix up your car and also to lend you another car until yours is fixed. What do you say to yourself now? I knew it would all come out right in the end. That's an optimistic view. Sometimes I have a good day. That's a more neutral view. Or maybe something terrible is bound to happen now. That's definitely a pessimistic view. So I mean, these are just silly questions, but it's interesting because optimistic and pessimistic thinking are styles of thinking which seem to be determined from our family experience. It seems that the style of thinking that your parents used, I mean, these are two different situations here. One is good luck and one is bad luck. And it seems that the response in your family from your parents to good luck and bad luck actually conditions your way of thinking. But once you realize that, you can change it, because optimistic thinking is the most useful thinking in most situations. So how can we get students to adopt efficacious, optimistic thinking? Excuse me. I suggest just some very, very simple, you've probably seen these exercises 1,000 times before. But the aim is to, what happens with someone who is constantly thinking pessimistically is that they tend to focus on the bad stuff. You know, they scan their entire environment and they zoom in on what is bad, what is going wrong. And that's no more real than focusing on what is going right or getting a balanced view. So if we can shift them to actually noticing some things that are positive, we can actually change their whole way of participating and sharing and working with other students, especially. So I suggest ask students when they come back to school, when you've got them in class, get them to make a list of successes, personal successes they've had in their past, anything at all. And it doesn't matter how they define success, anything that they would define as a success goes on that list. And then ask them every day to add one more thing to that list. Secondly, ask them to deliberately look for the positives in everyday life. You know, the things like, what have you got in your life that you are grateful for? You know, a roof over your head, food on the table, parents who look after you, a good school to go to, great teachers to learn from. You get them to list some of the positives in their everyday life, and then ask them to add one more thing to that every day. What it does is it causes them to start scanning around, looking for the positives in their life. Thirdly, get them to commit to at least one unselfish act per day. You know, that cup of tea that you take to your partner in bed every morning, and you don't have to, but you always get yourself out of bed a little bit before they do, so you can bring them a cup of tea because you don't have to. That's what makes relationships work. It's that one unselfish act per day, at least. And if you could help children to learn to do that, to deliberately do at least one unselfish act per day, you're starting them to feel positive about connection with others. 4, challenge themselves to achieve their goals, pushing themselves to higher levels, because higher levels are frightening, are difficult, are hard. But if they can push themselves and challenge themselves, of course, sometimes they will succeed and sometimes they won't. You've got to celebrate the successes and learn from the failures and get back on that horse and have another go. You know, challenging themselves is a very positive, proactive thing to do. And celebrate all successes and any good luck. It's good to celebrate success and celebrate good luck. And lastly, encourage others to be more positive. One really useful thing for children to do is to pick out children that they know who are a bit down and a bit depressed, and actually actively go out and help them be a little bit more positive, and share something positive with those other children. Because by helping someone else become more positive, you get more positive yourself. So here we have the four states. Now we'll go and look at the other axis, the control axis. Now this is from work by Julian Rotter on Locus of Control. And I'll go back to that slide there. So there's two extremes to this scale. One is an external locus of control, people who believe that everything in their life is out of their control, to an internal locus of control, people who believe that everything in their life is in their control. Obviously, they're extremes and people are somewhere along that grid. Julian Rotter, the locus of control is a measure of the degree to which people believe that they, as opposed to external forces, have control over the outcomes of events in their lives. Now, this links to, in education, the locus of control typically refers to how students perceive the causes of their academic success or failure in school. And this links, of course, to Carol Dweck's work on mindsets. So Carol Dweck's work is a lot to do with locus of control as well. So, I've got a little clip here to try and demonstrate what I mean by an external locus of control. This is one of my favorites. Have a look at this.
Whoa, that's not good. need this. I'm already late.
Somebody will come. Anybody out there?
Do you have a phone?
No. Sorry. Somebody! Hello? There are 2 people stuck on an escalator and we need help. Now, would somebody please do something? Help! I don't believe this. You gotta be kidding me.
I'm gonna cry.
Well, there's not enough left to do, is there?
Hello? Hey, don't worry about it. I'll fix it in a second.
He said he can fix it. All right. All right. That's more like it. He says he can fix it.
You like that? Locus of control. So I've realized it's 7:33. I should fit into the time, all right. So just think about your own locus of control. Now, you might not be able to read this on the slide. It's very small writing, so I'll read it out to you. Imagine this. Imagine you're in a taxi in a big city when it stops in traffic and waits, about a half a mile from your destination. 10 minutes pass with no movement. What do you do? Share that with someone else quickly. And see what fits here. Do you just wait patiently? Do you ask the taxi driver to find another route? Do you pay off the taxi, get out and walk? Or do you get out, walk to the front of the traffic jam, find out what the problem is, fix it and get back in your taxi and carry on? Because from A to D, a more internal locus of control, someone who takes control of absolutely everything around them, has a totally internal locus of control, which isn't necessarily the best way to be, but a certain amount of internality is definitely an advantage. Imagine you're on a footpath and someone is struggling to parallel park their car. What do? Do you just keep on walking? Do you ask them what the problem is? Do you guide them in using hand signals? Or do you tell them to get out of the car so you can park it for them? A to D is more internal locus of control. Number 3, you're in a project team at work. What is your normal role? Do you leave it up to everyone else to do all the work? Do you focus on doing your own part only? Do you help manage everyone else's tasks as well as your own? Or do you complete everyone else's tasks as well as your own and hand in the whole report from your own work? Because A to D is more increased internality and locus of control. Last one, imagine your family is going to New Zealand for your next school holidays. What is your normal role in organizing that? Just imagine that you could do that kind of thing. It's a bit of a dream these days, but we'll get there. What is your normal role in organizing an overseas trip like that? Do you let someone else do all the organizing? Do you just look after yourself? Do you organize the flights and accommodation and make sure everyone in the family knows what they need to do to get ready? Or do you pack everyone's bags for them, organize every minute of the holiday, keep hold of everyone's passports and tickets and herd them all along like sheep? Greater internality, greater control, not necessarily good to have totally internal control. But I want to give you an example of how you can help students to develop more internal locus of control. And I'm going to use the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team as an example, because they have training methods that are all about mental training, and they're all about how to manage the situation, which is often feels like it's out of their control. And the All Blacks are a remarkable team because they've been a professional team since 1995. And since then, they've had an 84.2% win record, which is the best win record of any team in any professional sport worldwide.
Beautiful. Bode Barrett saw again. Off he goes. Now can he link up? He's back to his own pace. Oh, gee whiz.
Now, I won't, you're probably not interested in rugby, so I won't bore you too much with the New Zealand All Blacks. But the thing about the All Blacks is that they put a lot of effort into mental training. And it's this guy here, Gilbert Enoka, who has done all the mental training. And 3 key points. I know I've done this before in another presentation. You may have seen that, but I'll go through them briefly. Number 1 is to stay in the moment, to focus on now, to focus on being here, right now. Because if you are engaged mentally with what has happened previously or what is about to happen, then you're not in total control of this moment. You're not in control of this situation. You're being pushed by the past and pulled by the future. So the technique to teach children to help them with staying in the moment seems to be mindfulness. Mindfulness seems to have a lot of really, really good strategies for helping children stay more focused in the moment. Number 2, avoid judgment. Now, this is the quandary and the problem in social media, is that social media is always getting young people to compare themselves with others. And they often get the feeling that they're not as good as this person, or they're better than that person, or that person's better than that person, or not as good as this person. It's all about comparison. And a lot of children end up thinking that everyone in the world is having a better time than them. And so there's a whole set of social media skills that children can learn that help them overcome the invidious and toxic social media comparison. And the last one is to control what you can control. Work out what is actually in your control and control that. And for a lot of children, the whole social action, especially around climate change, seems to be the area in which they can learn how to take control of a problem that they thought was out of their control. And it's a really good opportunity for children to learn how to create local solutions for global problems. And this is what social action is all about. And it gives children a feeling that they don't have to be hopeless, that hope can be generated, and they don't have to be helpless, because that control can be generated. And so if you want to see where all these exercises are, then I have a new platform called lalatat.com, called Learning About Learning and Thinking About Thinking, which you can access if you wish. And here's the exercise on social action. Hopefully when I click on this, it'll take us to the actual page. Oh, I've logged out. Take us. Here we are. So here is ATL skills for the DP. I'll just click on social action. Here is the social action exercise. So it starts with a mastery statement. What does the ATL skill of social action mean? A little description of it. And then it talks about recognizing social needs. Most social needs come from the unequal distribution of resources. People who are disadvantaged because they have fewer resources, resources that are wasted and resources that are in scarce supply. So it asks students to analyze their neighborhood and their community for disadvantaged people, wasted resources and scarce resources. And so they write down what people, what do they need, what resources, where they found, what resources, where they needed. Secondly, they generate ideas for social action, ideas for redistribution, for sourcing, and for creating. Then they take action to address a social need. What is their goal? The steps they need to take to achieve that goal, the deadline for each step, the resources, and where we will source the resources. Then they've got to do it. And then they work through unplanned obstacles, solutions, results, and conclusion. So I'm not going to bore you with any more stuff on that, but just showing you that all these resources are available in this platform. And if you go to lalatat.com, there is a free remote self-managed learning portal access for all teachers and students. So you can have all your teachers and all your students access to 65 different exercises that I've written in this kind of area focused on self-managed learning. So you're welcome to access that for no cost anytime you wish. So getting back to the no states, these are the characteristics of the 4 no states. I won't go through them in great detail, but the resilient is obviously self-motivated, bounces back, always learning. The hopeful has a positive attitude, but tends to be a procrastinator and tends to be self-promoting. The stoic is conservative and often pessimistic, but diligent, but sometimes self-blaming. And the vulnerable is accepting, passive, tends to get locked into their I can'ts and tends to be self-limiting. So if you want your students to move to the more resilient quadrant, then they've got to practice optimistic thinking and take control where they can. And these are the stats that I've gathered over the years for students. 33% tend to be resilient, but 13% tend to be vulnerable. And those are the ones that need to learn how to move. And you can take a test if you want at my other website, my own personal website called TaoLearn, taolearn.com. So you go there, this is the site. Everything is completely free on this site. You go up to the top left-hand corner and you'll see something called know states. It's kind of hidden there a little bit in the top left-hand corner. You click on the know states, you do the 2 quizzes, and you discover your know state and strategies that you can use to become more resilient. And there are questionnaires for age-appropriate questionnaires, and I've got some for students as well. So students can do this and get some advice on how to move to a more resilient state. So those are the 4 states there. And last thing is, you're welcome to email me directly, lance@lalatat.com. And we have a Facebook page at lalatatATL, and we have a Twitter page at lalatat1, and you're welcome to go there, and lots of tips and strategies and ideas for embedding ATL skills or 21st century skills. If you don't happen to be in an IB school, it's the same stuff. So it's all there, and you're welcome to get involved in the conversation.